We'll get started here. My name is Marguerite Herman, and I'm with the Cheyenne LWV Voters. This is the final of 6 forums sponsored by the Cheyenne LWV and the Wyoming Tribune Eagle for the 2018 general election season. Welcome to all here today and for everyone who will watch later online. Cheyenne LWV is recording and will upload this to YouTube. Links will be sent to candidates and posted on our Facebook page. Early voting continues in the county building atrium until next Monday, and you can get a paper absentee ballot from the county clerk's office. Also get information from her on how and where to register to vote. Election day is November 6th, and there are several vote centers around the county. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization open to everyone that works to help people get involved in their government, to be informed, and to vote. We hope these forums help provide some information, but we urge people to also check out the candidates' materials and to contact them with other questions. So the forum today is for district attorney. It's a partisan election for the 1st Judicial District, which is Laramie County. The candidates are Republican Leanne Grant Manlove and Democrat Lynn Boak. The term is 4 years. The current district attorney is not running for re-election. And the format tonight, this afternoon, is the one we've been using throughout the season, which is the candidates will have 2 minutes to open, introduce themselves, explain why they're running, and ask for votes. They will conclude with 2 minutes to sum up or to talk about some issue that has not been raised during the debate, during the forum. And then in between, we will have about 45 minutes for questions. And the Tribune Eagle and the League have written up several questions that we will get through. And in addition, we have, if you have a question you want to write on a card, you can give that to Katie back there, and we will try to get to it. The questions, the candidates will have a minute and a half to answer the questions, and then an additional 30 seconds to add, to rebut, or just to add to their own comments. So that's the format of how the vote will go. And we will get to it with the 2-minute introductions of candidates, and we'll start with Leanne Grant Manlove. So please, 2 minutes.
Thank you to the League of Women Voters and to the Wyoming Tribune Eagle for sponsoring this final debate between my opponent and I for the race for district attorney. I'm very happy to see a full room here and hope that lots of people who weren't able to join us over the lunch hour will be able to watch this online. I want to first start by telling you that earlier, Katie Call, who's a reporter for the Wyoming Tribune Eagle, remarked to Marguerite Herman that this campaign has felt like a marathon and not a race, not a sprint. And that's true, we're in the final 7 days. I'm asking for Laramie County voters to support me for district attorney. And from the very beginning, that is a pledge that I made, that I would meet with voters, I would listen to concerns, and I would try and be as responsive as possible. In so doing, since I announced in March, and we're now in almost November, I've been to approximately 35,000 doors in Laramie County, thanks to the wonderful supporters who have helped me in this campaign. And what I've learned from voters is that they're very concerned about the way Laramie County is going as it's growing. Concerned about property crime, concerned about an increase in drug use and drug-related crime, and also in crimes against children in our community. And the response from the district attorney's office that they've seen in the last almost 4 years has been extremely disappointing. And my pledge is to bring that excellence that that office once enjoyed back through careful conviction, sound judgment, and integrity.
Thank you very much. Ms. Boak.
Thank you, and I too wish to thank the League of Women Voters and Cheyenne Tribune Eagle for giving me this opportunity to talk to the voters. And I hope that other voters will watch this on YouTube. And I ask all of you to consider carefully who you want to be your next district attorney. It's from what I have heard, and I have talked to many voters also. There is a lot of concern about the district attorney's office. No one is happy with the way it's being run now, and so one way or another we will have a change. What I promise to do and what I offer the voters of Laramie County is years and years of experience, 39 years, dedication to this community. I came here as a young bride 35 years ago. I loved it and I have stayed. I could have gone many other places, but I chose Laramie County and I stayed here. I am concerned, and many people are concerned about things like animal cruelty, cruelty to children, abuse of children, domestic violence, financial and physical abuse of elderly people. And these are all things that I think I am uniquely suited for dedicating the office to prosecuting and investigating these things fully, and to making this a better and a safer community. And I ask for your vote next week. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to start a round of questions. And we'll start with Ms. Volk with a minute and a half. And the first question is, how specifically will your background in the legal profession or otherwise inform your approach to the job of Laramie County District Attorney?
My background is varied, and I don't think there's any such thing as irrelevant experience. I've had many years as a deputy district attorney in two very large cities, Denver and Fort Collins. I've also had 20 years of experience in federal law enforcement. I've been a special assistant U.S. attorney. I've been a special prosecutor. My experience, I think that probably the best prosecutor I ever met was a lady who had been in civil practice for 30 years before she joined the Denver District Attorney's Office and headed up their appellate division. Some of you may know Brooke Waneke. She practiced here for the first 20 years of her career. She is actually the person who inspired me and my then husband to move to Cheyenne, and we thought this was a wonderful community, and I stayed, he didn't, but my experience has been all over the board. I've had criminal, I've had civil, I've had administrative experience, and I think that all experience informs decisions that you make as a prosecutor, and everything that you know from practicing for 39 years goes into decisions that I would make as the head prosecutor in this county.
Thank you very much. Ms. Mandela, 1.5 minutes.
My most recent time in court as a criminal defense attorney has given me a new perspective on prosecution. With my private practice, I've been privileged to represent clients around the state. And from that experience, I've learned what I think could be some lessons that could translate well to Laramie County, especially as we talk about the huge number of cases that are on the criminal docket here in Cheyenne. Prior to my private practice, I was a prosecutor in Laramie County for 5 years, and I prosecuted everything from low-level misdemeanors to homicide cases. I benefited from the very wonderful mentoring and teaching from attorneys in that office, including my Uncle Dennis, who I see here, and the former District Attorney Scott Homar. And prior to that, I worked in the governor's office. I was the governor's press secretary. Prior to that, I was in the nonprofit world for the Wyoming State Bar Foundation. And what I can tell you is this: anybody can do the job of a prosecutor. Very few lawyers can do it well. And that's what I bring to this office: a total commitment and a proven record that I can do the job well.
thank you. And now, does anyone want to add, have 30 seconds to add on or respond further? Okay, very good. We will then proceed to question 2, and we'll start with Ms. Manlove on this one. A large part of the prosecutor's job involves dealing with law enforcement. They submit affidavits, do the investigations, and ultimately lead to charges. Sometimes there is a difference between what law enforcement officers see as appropriate charge and what an attorney can prove in court. If you're elected, how much influence would law enforcement have on your charging decisions? A minute and a half. I know it's kind of a global question, but a minute and a half.
This is an important question, especially in a community this size. The prosecutor's office relies on the investigative work of law enforcement. And currently, that relationship is totally broken. What I can bring with me in the Office of District Attorney is the confidence of law enforcement, the ability to work cooperatively and collaboratively, and a proven track record with law enforcement. I said in an earlier debate that one of the most important kind of stamps of approval that I have is that in my private practice, I have been retained by law enforcement individuals to represent them when they have been involved in officer-involved shootings. When a law enforcement personnel has to deploy his or her firearm, that case is investigated like any other shooting would be. And those law enforcement folks are entitled to legal representation. And I'm very proud to tell you that I have represented people in law enforcement in Laramie County who have been involved in shootings. I don't know that my opponent can say the same thing. The other thing I can assure voters is that because of my 5 years in prosecution, I have the trust of law enforcement, including the ability to disagree with them when it's necessary.
Okay, thank you. Would you like me to repeat the question? It's kind of lengthy. Okay.
It's a long question.
Yes, it is. And in any case, in any time, if you want me to repeat the question, let me know. Okay. A large part of a prosecutor's job involves dealing with law enforcement. They submit the affidavits and do the investigations that ultimately lead to charges. Sometimes there is a difference between what law enforcement officers see as an appropriate charge and what an attorney can prove in court. If you're elected, how much influence would law enforcement have on your charging decisions? A minute and a half, Ms. Bowe.
I think law enforcement has to have a great deal of influence on charging decisions. You have to earn their trust. You have to use the information that they provide, and you also have to provide a complete file to your defense attorneys, and that is provided by law enforcement officials who do the investigation and refer the case. With that being said, however, the ultimate decision is the district attorney's, and that's why lawyers are district attorneys, and lawyers generally are not involved in the law enforcement field, although I have experienced some lawyers who chose to be detectives and were very good ones. But what you have to do is make sure that law enforcement understands what proof beyond a reasonable doubt is and what they have to come up with as evidence in order to convince a jury that your prosecution is valid. And if you have to do a plea bargain, I would always get the buy-in from the detective who investigated the crime as well as the victim. And however, the decision would ultimately be mine as the district attorney.
All right, thank you. Another 30 seconds, anyone? Well, yes.
I just wanted to make sure that everyone can hear.
Oh, is there anyone having trouble hearing? Okay.
Hearing okay?
And the sound levels on the recording is good? Okay. Thank you. Good to ask. Well, and actually, what Ms. Bowe just brought up about victim rights, and we'll start with you on this round for 1.5 minutes. A district attorney ultimately represents the state of Wyoming, but in recent decades there has been a shift in the victim rights movement to give more weight to victims of crime. How would you as prosecutor balance the wishes of victims of crime with the responsibility to protect the community and serve justice? So, a minute and a half, Ms. Ball.
Thank you. A victim, of course, their feelings about what should happen to the case are extremely important. However, the victim is not the people of the state of Wyoming. The victim is the victim. And if the victim doesn't understand what proof beyond a reasonable doubt entails, or if the victim recants and doesn't want to pursue the case, I think that that's irrelevant to the decisions that the district attorney has to make to protect the people of the state of Wyoming, rather than represent the victim. You do not represent the victim. However, you have to treat the victim very respectfully and take their viewpoint into consideration in all decisions that you make.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Madeline, do you want me to repeat the question? No. Okay, here we go, minute and a half.
When I was prosecuting, one of my primary responsibilities for a period of time was for prosecuting domestic violence and stalking crimes. It was a position that was funded through the Department of Justice Violence Against Women Act. And what I learned from prosecuting those cases is that in almost every single domestic violence case, a victim doesn't want prosecution at the time of the case. A victim wants the violence to stop. And that is a very different goal than what a prosecutor wants, which is to seek justice on behalf of the state of Wyoming. And what I learned in prosecuting those cases is how to be respectful of a victim's circumstances, the context in which the violence happened, and still fulfill my obligation as a prosecutor. And learning how to balance those two, and sometimes a victim's family or the defendant's family can be a challenge. But it's something that I believe that I did very successfully. So much so that when I was campaigning, I had survivors in domestic violence cases who once were my sworn enemies, who, had nothing positive to say about me, actually joined me on the campaign trail. And in fact, one of them even told me that she knows she and her daughter would not be alive if I had not pursued that case. So it is very difficult prosecuting a case when there's violence between family members, but that's your obligation as a prosecutor, and you have to do it.
Thank you very much. Another 30 seconds to add. Our candidates are being concise and complete. So we will move on, and we'll start this round with Ms. Manlove. A chief duty of a district attorney is administrative. How do you plan to run your office? For instance, staffing and directions to your staff. Minute and a half.
The Office of the District Attorney in both Cheyenne and Casper is funded through state money, unlike the other prosecutors' offices around the state, which are county funded. Why is that important? Because you are responsible in Cheyenne for a $4.2 million appropriation from the state. It's a biennium appropriation. And you need to accomplish the work of the district attorney's office. It can be done for $4.2 million, contrary to lots of statements that we've heard from the incumbent. One of the ways that you do that is the way that I benefited from when I was a brand new prosecutor. You mentor, you train, and you help people understand how to prosecute. I said before, anybody can do this job, but very few people can do it well. I believe that that is something that you learn through not just continuing legal education or formal training, but you learn it by doing it. You learn it by going to trial. On the administrative side, I think that the office works well when it works together, cooperatively, internally, and that means hiring people who can do the job and do it in an environment where they trust one another. It's something that I enjoyed, and it's something that I intend to bring back to that office if elected.
Thank you very much. Would you like me to repeat the question, Ms. Volk? It's about your administration,
Yes.
hiring, direction, etc. Okay, a minute and a half.
I think I understand the question.
All right.
I think that I would be committed to not being a micromanager. I think that you have to set the general tone of the office as the district attorney, but that when you hire people, you hire the best people you can find, you train them well, you make sure that they're being mentored well, you make sure they understand what they're doing, you make sure they're prepared every time they go into the courtroom, and then you trust them to do the very best job that they can. And that's what I would do. That's how I would manage the office. I've managed groups of people in the past, and I've been managed by other people in the past, and I know that a micromanager is not respected or followed by the staff. They try to get around the micromanager. They try to subvert the micromanager. They resent being micromanaged. And so I would not be that kind of a district attorney. I would hire good people and I would trust them.
All right, thank you. Another 30 seconds?
Thank you. This is an important issue. In 2017, the district attorney's office had 3,060 index crimes cases. Index crimes is a statistics that is used by the FBI, and our Department of Criminal Investigation also categorizes cases in that same way. There were 354 registered sex offender cases. Okay, so that's 2017. If you go back to the prior administration in 2012, there were just slightly less than that. There were 2,941 index crimes and 316 registered sex offender cases. Administratively, I would do the work that was done with the same level of excellence enjoyed by the prior administration.
Thank you. Did you want to add to your? So we're going to follow up real briefly with that as far as budgeting your time. We talked about budgeting with the office, but budgeting your time. How much time do you see yourself spending in court, personally, trying cases? Will you be trying cases as all your staff attorneys, or will you rely on them to try cases while you work in the office? And we'll start with Ms. Volk. You kind of semi-answered that, but maybe go ahead and just...
I would certainly be a working district attorney. I would try cases along with my staff. I think that I would get input from everyone on staffing of cases and let people handle the cases that they feel the most comfortable with. Or if they want a challenge, I would give them more challenging work. I would take the cases that nobody else wanted. And I think that that's the mark of a good boss, is that you will do things the same things that you would ask your staff to do. As far as working in the office, I think that that's certainly an important function of a district attorney, and administration is a very important part of it. And I think that I am a good administrator. I've proved that in other positions that I've held, and I'm not particularly concerned about that. I think I can do well with the budget that we have, other than whining about it and saying that we need more people. I think that we will adapt to the conditions that the legislature has given us.
Okay, thank you. You want me to repeat the question?
Sure.
About budgeting your time? Sure. How much time do you see yourself personally spending in court versus in the office? Will you be trying cases like all of your staff attorneys, or will you rely on them to try cases while you manage the office? Minute and a half.
I'm running for district attorney to litigate cases, not sit in an office and have other people be the frontline soldiers. I'm not going to give orders from my desk and expect other people to carry them out and not get in there and roll my sleeves up and do the work. I want to be the district attorney so that I can prosecute. I'm not particularly interested in the title. It was never my ambition to be a politician. But I will tell you that I, in my experience, learned the most from doing the work. You can read as many Wyoming Supreme court opinions as you like. You can look at treatises, you can talk with other attorneys, but until you actually have to cross-examine a child sex predator in a courtroom in front of a jury, you don't know how to do it. You've got to try those cases yourself. My benefit for Laramie County, what I bring, is the ability to immediately step into that role. I can tell you what the Larson factors are when a court is considering, is a child competent to be a witness? I'm not sure that my opponent is able to do the same, and that matters because we've got to hit the ground running.
Okay, thank you. Follow-up?
Yes. I have tried cases in many different venues, and all of them have different procedures, and all of them have different rules. And the mark of a good attorney is one who can read the rules and understand them and not have to know them off the top of your head. In fact, it's dangerous to try to memorize things and just act accordingly. You need to know where to look it up, and you need to know who to ask, and I am that kind of person.
Okay, thank you. All right, 30 seconds.
When you're in a trial, you don't have the chance to look things up, to carefully consider what a law review article might say. When your opponent makes an objection, you need to know the rules of evidence, and you have to be able to respond, and I can do that.
Okay, thank you. And if you have any more to add, you can use your last 2 minutes. Don't go away. So, moving along. So the next question has to do with alternatives to incarceration. The overcrowding of the county jail, which is, it's being built on now, and the population there just continues to grow. And a question from the audience specifically addressed crimes of property or money, in other words, not violent crimes. The question that we drafted out, it kind of gets to that. Laramie County's jail capacity is an ongoing and growing problem. As prosecutor, you have a lot of discretion in what people will be charged with and or whether they will be referred to an alternative, such as treatment. So, alternatives to incarceration. How do you see yourself advocating or not for criminal justice reform? And that being a part of criminal justice reform. So, Ms. Manlow, a minute and a half.
I will not be an advocate for criminal justice reform if I'm elected the district attorney. What I will be is a prosecutor. I will leave the policy making and decision making about policy to the legislature, where it belongs in the legislative branch. What I will say is that based on my experience when I was the high intensity drug traffic area federal prosecutor through the DA's office, I was also responsible for staffing drug court. There are treatment courts in Laramie County, and they are highly effective. They work, and they work well when the proper person is put into them because they provide what's called wraparound services, holistic treatment. It's not just you're being punished, but it's you're going into treatment, and how else can we help you? I believe in treatment courts. I wasn't initially a believer. I thought it would be a waste of my time and taxpayer dollars. And I learned that I was wrong. Treatment courts work, and I fully support them. I would like to see them used in a broader way in Laramie County. Right now, you can only enter DUI treatment court on a felony DUI, and that's too late. That's 3 or 4 or 6 DUIs too late. We change the world by intervening sooner, and I would like to see that happen here.
Okay, thank you. Would you like me to repeat the question? Laramie County's jail capacity is an ongoing and growing problem. As prosecutor, you have a lot of discretion in what people will be charged with and or whether they will be referred to an alternative such as treatment. How do you see yourself advocating or not for criminal justice reform? And again, the questions from the audience specifically mentioned property crime, not violent crimes, as being, if you can address that perhaps, but in general, criminal justice reform, alternatives to incarceration.
I don't see the district attorney as being necessarily an advocate for criminal justice reform. I don't think that that's a proper role for the district attorney. However, I think that there there's a movement that I was reading about just last night called the Progressive Prosecution Movement, where people who used to be defense attorneys are becoming elected to prosecution offices and are working on criminal justice reforms at a state level. I don't think that that's really a proper role for the district attorney, but I would certainly support diversion, certainly support drug courts and DUI courts, and anything that will provide treatment instead of incarceration for people who would otherwise be contributing members of our community. I don't like to see people go to jail or to prison when they could be earning a living and supporting their family and paying taxes. So I certainly would not oppose, and I would certainly, if asked for my opinion, I would certainly give my opinion that these programs work and that they should be employed.
Thank you. Another 30 seconds?
I want to add that the prosecutor is not an island unto herself. Wyoming law requires that courts consider probation. And in fact, judges have to make that finding on the record when they impose a sentence. So what we do see most typically in Laramie County is probation, and very often that is probation with treatment, especially in cases where there is substance abuse that has played a role in the crime. So I think it's important for people to know that that is also the law.
Thank you. Would you like another 30 seconds, Ms. Bowles? Okay, so I think this is going to be our last question before we have closings. And we'll start with Ms. Boak on this one. So as a very influential official in the county, there's bound to be a lot of criticism of your decisions, of how cases were prosecuted, how they were handled. How do you see yourself dealing with that criticism? And the question from the audience is kind of a version of that, talking about how do you see yourself as chief prosecutor to help the public understand the court process and the difficulties of dealing, and certainly this is when you get under the microscope, people knows what you're doing when you're dealing with a sensitive issue, and how do you respond to public criticism? How would you handle that? And so you have a minute and a half.
I think it's proper for the district attorney to do outreach, to speak every time and every place that they are asked to do that, to explain the process over and over and over again, patiently, to be open to the press, to be inviting, in fact, to the press, to explain things when necessary and to explain them again when necessary. And I do know that there are some people who will criticize you no matter what you do. And I'm certainly not going to be devastated by criticism. I understand that this is a prominent public office and that there will always be people who are unhappy with something. And I will certainly try to make them understand, but if I can't, you just go about your business and do the best job you can do.
Okay, thank you. Would you like me to repeat the question? Okay, well, okay, so it's a minute and a half, Ms. Manley.
Thank you. This question makes me think of an old country song. Keith Whitley, I think, did it best. I'm no stranger to the rain. And in my case, as a prosecutor, I'm no stranger to criticism. When I was prosecuting, I felt like I was fighting with everyone, because I was. I was fighting with the victim and the victim's family, the defendant, the defense attorney, treatment providers, sometimes my colleagues within the prosecutor's office, frequently judges, probation and parole. And if you are not willing to go in and fight the good fight, it's not the job for you. I have been criticized many times by the current office holder, and that's fine. I don't always agree with everything everyone says. I'm married to a Democrat, and happily so, and have been married for more than 2 decades. to Cole Manlove, and he and I disagree about almost every single thing on the planet. So I'm no stranger to criticism. What I will say though is this: if you aren't willing to learn from that criticism, to be open as to how you could do your job better, you're not going to be very successful. You can't look to place blame on others. You have to be willing to be critical of the job that you have done. Even when you have, quote, won the case. What could you have done better? What might you have not done as well as a prior time? And that is something that I took with me from my time in the prosecutor's office, and that if elected, I will take back with me. You have to be willing to face criticism, not buckle to it, not be afraid of it.
Okay, thank you. Cedar, what do you want, another 30 seconds? Nope. Looks like we're going to go straight into the final 2 minutes, which, once again, can be used to sum up or to bring up a new topic or to add to one that you have more to say that we've already covered. And so we will start, we started the opening with Ms. Manlove, so we'll start the closings with Ms. Boak, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I have had a few debates with Ms. Manlove, and she brings up things that I would have brought up had I had the time, but 2 minutes is not very much time to bring anything up. I am very grateful to this community. I'm especially grateful to the volunteer firefighters who stopped the grass fire yesterday that would have had us evacuating 30 alpacas, 2 horses, and 2 donkeys in about 15 minutes. I'm extremely grateful to them. I love this community. I think that I can serve this community well. I think that there are many things that both candidates have to offer. I have breadth and length of experience. I have certain wisdom that I've acquired from 67 years on this earth. I have compassion, and I have, it's hard to describe, but you just learn more. The longer you're practicing law, and the longer you are taking on different kinds of cases with different kinds of facts, you are adding to your body of knowledge, and that cannot be a bad thing for a lawyer. I certainly do know the rules of evidence. I could recite them in my sleep, so I don't think that that's a valid criticism. And I can think on my feet, which is certainly a valuable attribute in a trial attorney. I don't think that my opponent has any attributes that I don't have, plus more experience and a dedication to this community that comes from choosing this community and not having just been born here.
Okay, so closing 2 minutes, Ms. Manlove.
Thank you. My opponent and I have known each other for almost 20 years, and during some of that time we have, like millions of other people around the world, been friends on Facebook. In our last debate, my opponent raised an issue that I thought was important. It resonated with me. She said she did not believe that the office of district attorney should be partisan, meaning Republican versus Democrat. And I have to say, I agree with that. But what I think is important for all Laramie County voters to know is the partisanship in which Ms. Boak has engaged in Facebook. On January 30th, 2017, she shared something from an organization called The Other 98%. Quote, "If there is a Muslim ban, refugees can pretend they're Christians, you know, just like Republicans do." End quote. And this statement that I found particularly offensive, on October 20th, 2016, my opponent shared an article from the Daily Kos titled "Donald Trump's Contempt for Democracy." And she didn't just share it, she opined. She said, quote, "When Trump supporters start wearing matching brown shirts, it's time to be very, very afraid." End quote. Who wears matching brown shirts? Nazis. And I will say that while Ms. Vogt's sentiments are protected under the First Amendment, that kind of partisanship and vitriol has no place in the office of the district attorney, and I believe she does not either. And I would ask for your vote as a proud Christian, as a proud Republican, as a proud Laramie County native. Thank you.
Thank you. And generally the closing statements have not directly addressed each other. So on this occasion, I think I will give each of you, since we had scheduled 1 extra minute, if you want to respond to the other. Just the nature of this closing, I think, would benefit from that opportunity. If you want to take it, it's completely optional. Okay.
I don't know how to respond to my opponent's comments. I will honestly tell you that I am no fan of Donald Trump's, and I certainly don't appreciate her comments about my viewpoint. I am allowed to have a differing viewpoint, but it has absolutely nothing to do with my qualifications to hold the office of district attorney, and I would ask you to please take those remarks in the spirit in which they were intended, which were to slam me for not believing in the same things that she apparently believes in. So, with that being said, I don't think that my lack of support for the current administration is in any way a black mark, or is in any way something that should make you think twice about voting for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Would you like an extra minute now?
Thank you. In a state, and in a county particularly, where we are profoundly Republican, I think it is important that people know Ms. Vogt's political views. They are not separate from the office of the district attorney when she is running as a Democrat. And I'll leave it up to all of you to make your own decision, especially when you're casting your ballot on November 6th. But I would ask that if you have a question or a concern about my position or my policy on an issue and you can't find it on my campaign Facebook page or on the YouTube videos, or if you'd just like to visit, please get in touch with me. I'd be delighted to visit with each of you. And thank you for attending today's debate.
And I would just like to echo that you can read all the candidate voter guides and watch the forums, but I'm sure both of these candidates will be happy to answer questions if you want to pursue things further. The whole point of this was to help voters find information that would help them in the ballot box, and if you have remaining questions, please contact the candidates for this office and for all the offices, really. The candidates want to get their message out. It's sometimes a little hard, so if you want to, if you have a question that hasn't been answered so far, please get in touch with the candidates and then avail yourselves of all the other information online. Tribune Eagle has a bunch, and we have forums for candidates too. So with that, this concludes really the general election forums that the Tribune Eagle and League had, and I have to say, at the point, we're trying to show people the difference between the candidates, they distinguish themselves. I think we achieved that today. I think they both did very well. Can we give them a hand?